My name's Maegan McCane. I am I guess technically third year master's student, but I'm finished now, because I passed my thesis defense, so it's all over. Um, and I'm currently living in London where I was doing my APE for my public health degree, which is really fun. And I'm just staying here, still working with the charity that I was working with before. And my thesis is entitled Everybody Likes Them, Exploring Popularity and Friendliness at an American Middle School. So I just wanted to first give some background on this project. I'm gonna try to keep it tight because I know I only have like 15 minutes. I used to work in Columbia with a group of adolescents, and the way that popularity looked in our school was really different from what I remembered as a kid. I remember popular people being really like mean and catty. And at my school in Columbia, it was like there were mean and catty people, but there were also people who were really well liked. And so when I went to grad school, I knew that I wanted to look at adolescent popularity and see if this was a thing, if there were like popular people who were actually nice. And so I started to wonder, like, what's the nature of popularity, specifically the kind of diversity that exists within this status. And the definition of popularity that I'm using comes from social psychology, and it's high status in adolescence that comes from social prestige, social power, or social visibility. And so anthropology doesn't have a really strong tradition of studying adolescent popularity. And it's been like 20 years without substantial movement in our field. And like most studies on popularity that like in both fields do acknowledge that like not all popular people are like liked, or they acknowledge some diversity within this status. But they tend to kind of focus heavily on looking at those who are like aggressive or who are like both mean and nice, or that fit into like sort of stereotypical molds of like cheerleaders and jocks. And so like the lack of studies on different kinds of popular students, particularly those that were mostly nice, led me to my research question, which is, there we go. What role does friendliness play in popular friendly like student status? So for my methodology, if I've talked to some of you about my research, I normally just say that all I did was gossip with children, which is true. But this was a mixed methods approach, where I used a peer nomination procedure, which comes from social psychology. And it involves me giving students a class roll with their peers' names on it, all the peers who consented, and having them mark down if they felt the person was friendly, popular, unpopular, and if they liked or disliked them. I use semi-structured interviews and participant observation, and the Big Five inventory, which is a personality assessment that measures agreeableness, extroversion, conscientiousness, openness, and neuroticism. My participants had to be a seventh or eighth grade student enrolled in Spanish at Prince Street Preparatory School, which is a public magnet school in Southwest Alabama. I'm a former student of Prince Street, and so I chose Spanish class because I knew that the majority of students there took Spanish since I went there. And so I knew that if I sampled from the Spanish class that I would get the majority of each grade. And I was also closest to the Spanish teachers, so I knew that they would not have a problem with me being in their classroom. And I was familiar with their pedagogical techniques, which involve a lot of like group work, conversation. They like let kids talk recreationally, as I would say. So I knew that I could observe a lot of conversation that wasn't centered around school, and see kids being like very dynamic with their bodies because they allow them to get up and move around the room. And then I excluded sixth grade because, again, as like a former student, I knew that sixth graders have a different kind of cohort experience at the school. They're physically separated from seventh and eighth graders. They can't join sports or clubs. They have a different lunch period. They don't take PE with the seventh and eighth graders, and they don't take a foreign language. So I kind of wanted to see, by looking at seventh and eighth grade, if there were some kinds of similarities in their class culture, because they do share some aspects of the school day and school culture, but also if there would be some differences since they are still quite separate. um and then I did data collection over 5 months at the beginning of 2022. I was there 4 days a week for the whole school day. Students were seen one-on-one. They were given the peer nomination procedure, and then they were interviewed. And after all the students took the peer nomination procedure, those who were categorized as being popular, friendly, and liked were given the Big Five and then interviewed a second time about their feelings on their status at school. I did participant observation throughout the study. I observed every student at least twice, but I did like very targeted participant observation with the popular, friendly, like students, i.e. observing them for like an entire class period over like multiple days. And then I did correlational analysis for the peer nomination, popular, friendly, and like scores, since those were the ones that I was most interested in looking at. The interviews and participant observation notes were transcribed and analyzed for emergent themes, and the Big Five inventory was scored and compared to peer group semi-structured interview results. The Big Five has its own scoring criteria. Oops. Okay, yeah, that worked. So my incredible participants were 53 7th and 8th graders. The median age was 12.5 years and it was 72% female. I recruited 63, but 10 dropped out, one got expelled. So it was just kind of, and then the other 9 just never showed up. And then by grade, it was pretty unequal. So I had 27th graders and 33 8th graders. And then the demographics are shown. So I had an incredibly diverse sample. When Prince Street was founded, it was mandated that the school had to be half Black. It was used to settle a desegregation lawsuit. And so even though that mandate has expired, the admins remain like largely committed to these percentages. So as a result, the school is like mostly half Black, it's 47%. But the number of Black students is roughly representative of the school, but Asian students were overrepresented in our sample, and Hispanic students and students of more than one race were underrepresented. And these demographics are also not necessarily reflective of the city that it sits in, which is more like 50-50 Black, white, nor the county, which is a little more white and a little less Black and a little more Hispanic. Nope. Okay, so I have a lot of results. So let's strap in for the results. So for the peer nomination procedure results, the peer nomination procedure itself helped me to understand like who's what status in the peer group. And so like the proportion of students who were popular was about, oh goodness. Thank you. It was about 40% in each grade, as you can see. 55% were friendly and 58% were liked. But with liked, we do see some difference by grade. So a higher proportion of students were liked in the 8th grade versus the 7th grade. And then next, I looked to see if there were students who were multiple statuses. And so there were not that many people who were multiple statuses. So we can see with like friendly and liked about 42%. And then there was something different though that happened with being popular in another status. So as we can see, like the numbers are like, oh, someone said they can't hear me. Can everybody else hear me? Good. Okay. Okay, great. So what was I saying? Okay, so yeah, so there were like significantly less people who were popular in something else. So as we can see, 25% popular and friendly, 23 popular and liked, and 17% popular, friendly, and liked. And we see that by grade it's also different. So there are like only 15% of students were popular and friendly in the 7th grade versus like 30 in the 8th grade. So I thought that was interesting that there was that difference. So then, is it doing it? There we go. Okay, so then I did a correlation analysis between popular, friendly, and liked, and these showed no relationship between popular and liked, nor between friendly and popular. But there is a strong positive correlation between friendly and liked. But then when we look by grade, we do see some differences. So in the 7th grade, there was no relationship between popular and liked, nor between friendly and popular. But in the 8th grade, popular and friendly do have a relationship. And it's quite a significant relationship, as we can see. And so, yeah, some differences. So then after I had given them this peer nomination procedure, I moved on to interviews. And so much of the initial interviews revolved around me trying to understand what it meant to be popular, because in order for me to understand students who were popular, friendly, and liked, I needed to understand more about popularity. And so these data first and foremost showed that popular was defined as being well-known, and well-known meant being talked about, and you could be talked about in a good way or a bad way. And so students said that someone could be popular in a good way or a bad way, and being popular was made up of several different aspects, and all of these aspects had valence. And during analysis, these were identified as having popular friends or a lot of friends, playing sports, being in a romantic relationship, being attractive, or in some instances being friendly. And all these aspects were common, but they weren't a checklist that students had to fulfill in order to be popular, and nor were they an end all be all. Some students had all of these and were not popular, and some students had very few of these and were. And so each of these had a lot of nuance. And so I've just sort of outlined some of the key findings from all of these aspects. I of course go into much more detail in my actual thesis document, but and it's really hard for me to hold back, like, because I want to talk about all of it. But with friendships, who you were friends with could raise your status, but you had to be very close to that popular person. So there was a lot of like relational closeness that had to come with sort of friendships raising one's status or making someone popular. And having a lot of friends could make you popular because more people literally knew who you were, and it was all about being well known. Friendliness was like speaking to a lot of people, and friendly popular students were described as speaking to people without pursuing that relational closeness. Seventh graders said that their popular people were mostly mean and unfriendly, while eighth graders said that their popular people were mostly nice, but there were a few who were mean and unfriendly. Relationships, they were cool because it was an activity that few students engaged in, and if you dated a popular person, it could make you popular. And students love to talk about relationships. What kinds of relationships they like to talk about kind of differed by grade. So seventh graders were more interested in like toxic relationships, people who were breaking up, making up, fighting. And they described being in a relationship as being almost necessary to popularity, but eighth graders did not feel that it was as necessary. And eighth graders enjoyed talking more about relationships that were goals. More of my seventh graders dated than my eighth graders. So out of 8 popular seventh graders, 6 were dating or known to date, whereas out of 13 popular eighth graders, only 5 of them dated or were actively dating. Plenty of them were like, I don't want to date middle school. I don't want to date someone in middle school. With attractiveness, half of the sample said that in order to be popular, you needed to be attractive. But they were sort of like reluctant to endorse like facial beauty standards that they thought were important. Instead, they said stuff like everyone has their own type of pretty. But they did say that you needed to be skinny in order to be attractive. However, like skinny did not mean being thin all over. It meant having a very specific body type that differed for girls and boys. So for girls, it meant having a slim waist, a large butt, and large breasts. And for boys, it meant being like a slim, muscular kind of look. And they also talked about sort of what I call cultivated attractiveness, that came through like style and accessory choices, hair, makeup, like grooming choices that don't necessarily have to do with like sort of your God-given features. And then sports, students said that being good at sports was very important in being popular, but some sports were more popular in some grades than others. Like the football team was really bad, so some people on the football team were popular, but some were not. And so now we have the popular, friendly, and liked students. So after I've kind of figured out what it is that you need to be popular, I had kind of come down to 9 students who were categorized as popular, friendly, liked. So again, like we go from 53 to 9. So this is not very many students were popular, friendly, and liked. And all of them had different social profiles. 4 of them had played or were currently playing a sport. Only 2 of them dated. They were all close with both popular and unpopular people. And I guess that most of them were considered attractive. I think all kids are cute, so I'm not the best like gauge, but plenty of them were mentioned by like other students as like, oh, she's really pretty, or he's, a really attractive guy, et cetera, et cetera. And so I first gave them the Big 5 inventory to see how they felt about themselves. And the more social traits, which were openness, agreeableness, and extroversion. Agreeableness is more so related to like friendliness in the literature, had the highest average scores. And then I did some correlational analysis, but there was really no relationship between any except for agreeableness and neuroticism. There was a negative relationship. And from the semi-structured interviews and participant observation, I found that the students like described themselves and were observed engaging deliberately in behaviors that they felt would include their classmates. They frequently all said that they wanted to make their peers laugh. They wanted to make them feel less alone. They wanted to make them feel comfortable. Students said things like, if we're not doing nothing, if nobody in the classroom is talking, I'm gonna say something because why we sitting quiet? Or another student said, you have to like care for people, not physically, but mentally care for people. If they're not looking too good, sit them down and talk to them. Like just make them know that you're there and you care for them. And when I asked them, like, how do you know when it's time to include someone, they would say that they would kind of read the energy of the classroom or a specific classmate and then do something like tell a joke, go sit with a person, or move themselves around the room, or engage someone or a group in conversation, or engage the teacher in a conversation or a joke in order to kind of get the energy in the classroom to be more inclusive, or get the energy up of the person that they were sort of targeting, to make them feel like they were more included. And so what was interesting is that, like, while they described doing these things on purpose, there were other popular students who described doing the opposite, who practiced very exclusive behaviors with their peers. I had one student who said, like, I have to like be mean to the nerds so that they know like not to get close to me. Like, I don't want them too comfortable speaking to me. So for my discussion, just my sort of main points is that popular is not the same as being friendly or liked. It means being well known. Popular students are a lot more varied than just being a mean girl or a cheerleader or a jock. There are popular students who do not fit this model. And that in answering the research question, I found that friendliness's role in popular friendly like students is intentionally inclusive behaviors that are extended to everyone in the peer group. So I had some limitations because no studies without limitations. This study sample was heavily 8th grade and female, meaning any generalization should be tempered. I excluded 6th graders. It was a deliberate choice, but it means that some things about cohort difference could be lost. It'll be hard to make generalizations about anything because this is a small sample, it's 53, but especially about sort of each grade because the samples were even smaller. So, with 7th graders, I only had 20 of them. And then I also, spoke and looked like many of the students that I interacted with. I'm very young. I'm pretty. And I was also a student at Prince Street. So that gave me a sort of legitimacy with the admin and staff. And it made me attracted to the students as someone to talk to. I also, had to examine sort of my own biases in that, like, I love kids and I tend to want to believe the best about them. So in writing about them and in thinking about them, there were times where I sort of wanted to believe that their intentions were good instead of like if someone was like, I was mean to her, I'm like, yeah, you were, but like that doesn't mean she's mean, like, and because I just wanted to believe the best. So I know that, my own biases are in there and I had to check those quite often. And just some more recommendations for future research, more longitudinal studies, recruiting more students, looking at each aspect of popularity in depth because all of these were so heavy, and ensuring a more even mix of students from each grade. And then just my acknowledgements, my friends, my family, my advisor. This thesis is dedicated to my parents and to my kids, both the ones in Colombia who inspired the research and my American children who gave me their time and their words and their lives to write about. So thank you. Any questions? That was definitely longer than 15 minutes.
Does anybody have any? Sorry, go on. Megan, have you read the book Queen Bees and Wannabes?
I have not. Isn't that the book that inspired Mean Girls?
Yeah.
No, I haven't read that book.
Sorry, I'm not hearing. Oh, here, wait. Turn yours off and let me. Okay, wait. Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you the whole time.
Sorry, there's too many of us in the room. Yeah, did you feel um like I'm a big fan of that book, and so I just was curious to know because I'm guessing you read it or interacted with it. Did some of that model come through in what you observed? The
Um, Maybe. I think that definitely when we sort of think about like how aggressiveness is like displayed in school, like um it's it's not like super, it's not like physical aggression. So, things are like a lot more coded, and stuff sort of like happens on Instagram, or like, it happens like somebody posted a TikTok about somebody or whatever, and people were talking about people behind their backs. And so like that was definitely a thing. Um, but yeah, I hope that answers the question. Somebody put something in the chat. What do you hope the future impact of this kind of work will be? Well, I definitely hope that it'll help. um I hope that it'll help people who work or do research in school contexts to kind of better understand things that are going on with kids. One of the things that was also really important to me is that this was supposed to be a study about Colombian children, and I specifically wanted to talk about Colombia and not talk about violence, and it became a study that was about mostly Black children from my own community. And I wanted to talk about kids, Black kids in the South, or kids in a multiracial context, and not talk about violence and not talk about what they lack. I wanted to talk about what they experience and care about on a day-to-day basis. And while plenty of my students are, experience racial stress, um, they also think very heavily about who said what about them in the bathroom that they overheard. And I desperately wanted to talk about that and make that the center. I also found so many different things about so many different kinds of kids. I had some decent little data about like queer students, and how they enacted like romantic relationships, friendships, enacted their sexuality at school. Um, I hope that that encourages people to do more studies on these kinds of kids. I hope that it encourages people to do more studies on attractiveness, on sports, on friendliness, on friendship practices of adolescents at this age, the 11 to 13 age. It's such a great age. And it's an age that sometimes we kind of tend to not necessarily hit. We're like, let's get that early adolescence, or not early, late childhood, or early childhood, or late adolescence, like 16, 17. But that age, I'm very passionate about that age. There's a bias there for me. And so I would hope that, this would show how rich this world is, um and encourage people to explore that richness even more. I wish that I could have done it. Like, me and Dr. McClure would always talk about like, if this study could have been at least a year long, and it's like, yes, this study needed to be at least a year long. Like, but then we would have been veering into dissertation territory. So I only got 5 months, but I would have, if I could have done more, like the things we could have gotten into. How did the students who were being interviewed for being the most popular react to this, knowing they were the most popular the day beforehand? Um, so at first, like, nobody knew who was anything. So they were just like talking. And then later, when I had to pull the 9 in and be like, oh, this is the reason that you like are being, interviewed a second time. a lot of them felt very flattered. So like I remember one of them was like, "Oh, you shouldn't have told me that. That was an ego boost." And some of them were like, "I didn't even think that like that would be me." And so like I had like I want to say there were 9 of them. I want to say like 5 of them said something like, "Oh, like I'm popular, but I'm not as popular as like so and so," or like I don't think I'm the most popular person in school. But I had like one kid who nobody said she was unpopular. She had 0 unpopular nominations. So like for some of these kids, there was just like, this incredible degree of like consensus around like their status. And so it was interesting that they like didn't necessarily conceive of themselves as like being the most popular, but they did a lot of times conceive of themselves as being popular. Um, but when we sort of first did the initial interview, um, I never got the impression unless they like rated themselves, which some of them rated themselves. And that was also really interesting to see if like they rated themselves. And you know, plenty of students rated themselves as popular. So there is this kind of like awareness of it. Um, but I guess I didn't get the impression that it was a hindrance. Maybe that's again my own bias, but there was some level of awareness about their status.
I guess I have a question. In terms of like material, because oftentimes materialism ties into popularity in class. Was that ever seen within your study?
Yeah, so the kids wore uniforms. So some of the like easy ways I guess that we could use to like show class and status through materialistic goods was kind of taken away in that aspect on sort of a daily, but they were allowed to have like accessories like bags, earrings, like these kinds of things, watches. So like they were wearing Apple watches. Some people had better cell phones than others. Some people had no phones. I know when I was in middle school I didn't have a phone. Designer bags, things like that. They could do, I think they would do it maybe like once a month or something like that. It was like a fundraiser where depending on how much money you paid, you could wear something from home. So like if you paid $1, you could wear like shoes that were not uniform shoes. If you paid like $3, you could wear like a shirt and shoes, and then like $5 you could wear like a whole outfit from home. And so like on those days, like those were times where the kids could like really come and like show off what it was that they had and show off their style. And so those were the days where like the kids kind of got these glimpses of like what people looked like and could kind of like make their judgments. um but again, like it was like once a month, so they relished those opportunities, but they didn't come on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, but again, you still can show off wealth in certain ways with like accessories and things, and they took advantage of that.
All right. Thank you so much, Megan. If nobody else has any questions, we can move on to our other presenter, Joseph. I'm going to share your PowerPoint real quick. Unless would you prefer to share it yourself, or would you want to do the same
Yeah, I
thing as
guess
me?
it'd probably be easier if I can do it.
Okay,
Should I
yeah.
be able to share screen?
Um, mhm. Is it letting you?
I think so. Anyone see that?
Yep.
Right. So I'm going to talk about my thesis research now. And the title of my thesis is Magnetic Gradiometry, Persistent Places, and uh, Plazas, the Viability of Shallow Geophysics in Built Jungle Environments at La Sufricaya, Petén, Guatemala. So in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of glaze over some of the sort of background stuff pretty briefly. So the larger theory that I was using was social archaeology, which basically actually is explained by its name. It's a broad range of approaches that deal with the social. So this is focusing on how people in a culture interact with each other and with the society at large. So within that category, I talk a lot about landscape and place. So landscape is an inherently social understanding of space that emphasizes not just the natural aspects, so not just the physical environment and the constructions that a culture creates, but also the more social significance of that landscape to the people and what it means for them, the people who inhabit it. Place, on the other hand, is distinct from landscape. Place is a specific location, which is often within a landscape, and places are sort of defined and shaped through the social activities that happen. So here we see sort of my attempt at depicting landscape and place, despite them being sort of nebulous categories. But landscape can be understood as sort of a broader area that includes the natural environment and the structures held within, whereas place tends to be a more specific area within a site, for example, such as this with this specific structure at the site. Specifically, the theory that I found to be most applicable to my site of La Sufricaya was persistent places theory. So persistent places theory. This theory was first proposed by Sarah Schlanger in 1992, and she basically defines it as a place that's used repeatedly during the long-term occupation of a region. So because of this, there's a cumulative nature to these constructions where people live in a place over time and material builds up from the things that they create on the landscape. La Sufricaya is an example of this because the site, as we'll go into, shows a period of intense use followed by relative abandonment, but habitation still continued or persisted at the site throughout time. A little bit of background on shallow geophysical research. Shallow geophysics are methods that are borrowed into archaeology from the geological sciences. They've been used greatly since they were first borrowed from geological sciences, and now are pretty understood to be very valid and well-researched methods of archaeological research. They are ideal for understanding landscape and place because of the information that they can tell us about wide swaths of land, specifically looking at the structures and the environment that a culture has built throughout a landscape. So shallow geophysics have become very popular in archaeology because of their utility, because they've been proven to be very beneficial methods. But the story is a little different when you're looking at the Maya area. In the Maya lowlands specifically, the shallow geophysical methods have been vastly underutilized compared to other areas. There are very limited amount of research that has been done using these methods in this area, some of which are listed here. I'm not going to go into detail on those. But there are a variety of reasons for why these methods haven't been used as much in this area. One is it's a difficult environment. These tend to be jungle environments, which are just physically difficult to work in. But it's also, this region includes a lot of complex and layered contexts of sort of different time periods all layered among each other, which also happen to be high in limestone and moisture, which can make geophysical research more difficult. So the examples that do exist of shallow geophysics in the lowland area do show that there is some validity and utility to these methods despite the difficulties. So there are promising results, even though there are advantages and disadvantages. Some of the disadvantages include the fact that the surveys are difficult because of the environment. Data can be noisy, as well as possibly the data could end up being completely useless. It's also unpredictable. On the other hand, they tend to be relatively quick and they can cover entire wide areas as opposed to having to sample more selectively. They also reduce the need for excavation and can kind of help guide excavation. They cause less damage to sites, which is increasingly considered important by archaeologists as we take sort of the preservation of sites more seriously. And finally, they provide data that otherwise would not be discovered. A little bit of background on the site. We kind of have to discuss two different sites, Homul and La Sufricaya. My research focused specifically at La Sufricaya, but it's very connected to the site of Homul. So here you can see the Maya region, and here the Homul with La Sufricaya is located basically right next to it in the northwest Petén, near the border of Belize. So Homul is the larger site. It is located, as I said, in the northwest Petén in Guatemala. His occupation spanned from about 800 BC to 950 AD. It's known for being one of the first Maya sites that was stratigraphically excavated, and it had one of the earliest Maya ceramic sequences developed. It's also known for its impressive monumental architecture, murals, ornate ceramics, as well as the Homul frieze. But most relevant for my research was it's known for these connections with Teotihuacan and the Entrada, which we'll talk about a little later on. But these connections are particularly noted at La Sufricaya, just sort of a sub-site within the Homul region. Here you can see some images of Homul. Note especially the impressive architecture. These are just truly giant structures. You can see with the people here on the steps sitting there. So a lot of this research at Homul has emphasized its role in the Entrada event that happened in 378 AD. This is an event where people from central Mexico, from Teotihuacan, came into the Maya area. Tatiana Proshkuryakov first talked about this phenomenon in 1993, and she referred to it as the arrival of strangers, and it's since been studied intensely by Mayanists because of its importance throughout the region. Evidence of interactions with Teotihuacan and the Entrada at Homul include Talud Tablero architecture at Homul, which that style is distinctive of Teotihuacan, as well as artifactual evidence and especially the murals that were found at La Sufricaya. So moving on then to talk more specifically about La Sufricaya. La Sufricaya is located here in relation to Homul. You can see the Homul region on this map. And La Sufricaya is a smaller site that's, did I miss a slide? No, okay. It's a smaller site that's located about 1.2 kilometers west of Homul's main plaza. And it's composed of two plazas, the lower plaza, which is on the north, which includes several residential groups in the ball court, and the upper plaza, which is raised 3 meters higher than the lower plaza. And this, on top of this upper plaza, there's a temple, as well as the palace complex. Construction at the site of La Sufricaya took place somewhere between the year 300 AD and 378 AD. And this is notable because this means that construction began at the site before the Entrada event occurred. So this means that it was the beginning of the site was not spurred on by the Entrada. Here you can see the layout of the site in two different views. Here, this is sort of the, can you see my mouse? You probably can't. Anyway, we're gonna have to go with it. So here's the upper plaza with the palace and the temple, as well as the lower plaza with the ball court and some residential. So La Sufricaya's construction happened over 3 phases. The first phase, the site was leveled and the plazas were built up as sort of the foundation of the site. In the second phase, the palace complex and structure 2 were constructed on top of the upper plaza, and the plazas were also built up further. And in the third phase, the ball court on the lower plaza was built and the plazas were replastered. So what really makes La Sufricaya interesting as a site is that for a time, the royal court of Homul moved from Homul to La Sufricaya, which is a much smaller site nearby. And this sort of was the establishment of a new Homul ruling dynasty. So there's evidence of this in the lack of dated monuments at Homol between 350 and 450 AD. And we can see that La Sufricaya was a place of royal residence through the burials. And then La Sufricaya then shows evidence of interaction with Teotihuacan. So the palace murals are some of the most compelling evidence of this. Here you see one of the murals with a Teotihuacan style structure as well as a Maya structure and people meeting between them, indicating interaction between these two groups. There are also depictions at the site of warriors in Central Mexican or Teotihuacan style garb. And then mural 7, which is dated to 379, which is just a year after the Entrada event occurs. And it talks about the accession of Siakak, who is the central figure really associated with the Entrada. So there's pretty strong evidence that La Sufricaya was involved with Teotihuacan. Here you can see some of that graffiti and depictions of Teotihuacan style people. And this is the reference to that ruler associated with the Entrada. Further evidence at the site of Teotihuacan influence include, again, we see the Tulud-Toblero style architecture and this green Pachuca obsidian, which comes really only from central Mexico. You can see the upper plaza of La Sufricaya here. Skip the background down plazas. Okay, so magnetometry is one of these shallow geophysical methods, and this is the one that I use for my research. And this is a method that measures local variations in the Earth's magnetic field with two different types of magnetism, induced and remnant magnetism. You don't need to know the details on that. So magnetic gradiometry, which is the specific type of magnetometry that I used, uses two sensors, which helps it basically be more accurate by subtracting out environmental differences in magnetism. Magnetic anomalies are areas detected by magnetometry that have a different magnetic signature than surrounding soils. So there are some limitations, of course, with this project. First, and perhaps most obvious, being that a lot of features and artifacts that we might hope to find don't have strong magnetism. So this method obviously won't help in finding any of that sort of stuff. Furthermore, there are limitations in the environment. So the heavy limestone and moisture concentrations in the lowland Maya area could make this survey more difficult or less productive. There's also the chance of noise, as there is with any geophysical research, but especially in this area, we expect there to be extra noise. But despite this, it's still possible, and it's been said that geological factors very rarely prohibit the use of magnetometry. So here you can see our magnetometry grid laid out. We did a 20 by 20 meter grid across both of the plazas, and we basically surveyed the whole area. And you can see the layout of the grids, and these blank spaces are where structures are located upon the plazas. So here, this is where the palace structure was located, and this large square of 4 blocks in the center, it was where the temple is located on the plaza. Here you can see Dr. Quijiguez operating the instrument. So after our gradiometry survey, we performed ground truthing excavations throughout the site to address those anomalies. So here are basically results. Results for the lower plaza show several anomalies of interest. These small dark spots are small positive anomalies, and there are some semicircular ones as well as large linear anomalies. So these are some of the things we tried to investigate on the lower plaza. And then on the upper plaza, you see some similar ones, as well as this very large, on the right-hand side, this very large positive anomaly was of interest. I'm going to go really quickly through these excavation results. So excavation 103 was on the lower plaza, and what it found based on some of those small positive anomalies was a series of very large uncut rocks that seemed to form a wall running about roughly north-south. And this is probably what caused that small anomaly. You can see here a picture of this unit with the wall, as well as a couple different plaster floors representing the different stages of construction of the plazas. Excavations 112 and 106 were both on the western side of the Upper Plaza, and these revealed sort of a set of stone walls that had different construction fills on either side. So one side had sort of the typical larger construction fill that we would expect, and then the other side had a smaller fill that was that had a bunch of pebbles and really highly fragmented sherds, which seems to perhaps have had a more ritual significance. Here you can see one of these excavations with the wall running through it and then differing fills on either side of that wall. Excavation 104 revealed also several of these plaza floors, again, representing these different stages of construction. And it also reveals sort of mysterious round feature carved into the bedrock that was full of plaster. It seems possible that this may have been used for plaster production. That's not entirely clear. You can see this excavation with very clearly defined those different stages of plaza floors, and then here is the bedrock channel down at the bottom. Excavation 102 and 105 were both located on the eastern side of the Upper Plaza, and this is where that really large round positive anomaly was here, number 6. And this excavation actually revealed an cash offering that was cut into the plaza, which contained a single lidded vessel. You can see here, these two excavations kind of aimed at the center of this anomaly where this cache was actually located. There. So in conclusion, what conclusions can we draw from this research? So we saw that the construction timelines that had already been sort of suggested from previous research do line up with our survey and excavations, with there being these 2 or 3 different stages of plaza construction. Furthermore, we see sort of an interesting method of constructing the plazas with these internal walls for structure that had fills on different sides. This is not a very common phenomenon in the Maya area. So there's also, we saw this kind of mysterious bedrock feature that was filled with plaster, which is still a bit of a mystery. As far as the shallow geophysics go, what did we find out? Well, we had mostly positive results, which is a good thing. We helped to expose these different constructions, these different construction phases of the plazas. We saw these different fills and layers of floors, as well as these internal structural walls. And I think the compelling evidence that this research is worthwhile is that this gradiometry survey helped us reveal some features that would otherwise not have been discovered. That includes these internal plaza walls, which we saw as linear anomalies in our data, and this bedrock feature, which we wouldn't have found without having the gradiometry data kind of highlighted for us, as well as that cache, which was quite an exciting find. But from the surface, you wouldn't be able to tell that, but our gradiometry survey helped us find that. So is La Sufricaya a persistent place then? Well, I argue yes, because not only did habitation continue at the site after it sort of lost its major power, but the public architecture and the monuments still continued there as physical reminders of the history and the importance of the place. So it persisted not just in a physical sense, but in the region's social memory. What is the overall significance of this research? I think that this adds to the slowly growing body of geophysical research in this area, suggesting that these methods are valid in this area and are worthwhile. Basically, I think my research helps to push forward the idea that more work like this should be encouraged and this shouldn't be ignored. It also goes to show that shallow geophysics works especially well in coordination with ground truthing, because the survey only got us so far and excavation was needed to find out what it really meant more specifically. Finally, these geophysical methods can reveal data that would otherwise be lacking, which sheds more light on the site being studied. I would just want to say thank you to my committee, especially my advisor, Alex Tokovinen, and then special thanks to the Homo Archaeological Project and Francisco, as well as Cynthia, Aura, Clara, Dana, and Lily. And that's all I've got. Any questions?
I have a I have a oh wait, I see what's going on. It's an echo. Maybe
Oh, here, wait.
okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. I have a methods question. I'm curious, like when I look at the map of the magnetometry, there's like all of this metal, which is like, or maybe it's not metal, but it's just like all of these really strong dipoles, which I, in addition to it being a jungle, might also be maybe part of the reason people don't use it in the region. Do you feel like it's still worthwhile, or are there other things like artifact
Yeah.
litter on the ground, trees that grow in interesting places, like other
So
proxies?
it is a lot of it. A lot of it is that. A lot of it is basically noise because we cleared the plazas as well as we could, but it's a protected area, so some species couldn't be cut, and some of the trees were just too big for that to be feasible. So there are areas of missing data, and that's I think where a lot of that noise is coming from. Um, but I still think that drawing, especially from some of the previous research that has been done, including research by Dr. LeCount at Oxygen, which is actually right nearby, just across the border in Belize. She used magnetometry at that site, and her data was also very noisy, but they were still able to use it to kind of guide their excavations, and it did help them answer their research questions, even though the data is not ideal. So I think that's part of what is sort of a mental block stopping a lot of Mayanists from using it is, oh, it doesn't look like the best data. But I think that there's starting to be more and more evidence that it can still be worthwhile, especially given some of these things that otherwise wouldn't have been discovered. Okay, this question says, you had mentioned that some of the sherds found in the plaster may have had ritual intentions. Is it known what they were, whether they were used for protection, trade, wealth, prosperity, crop wealth, etc.? So yeah, I didn't go into too much detail on this, but I can go into a little more. This was one of those kind of construction fills where we saw one type of fill on one side of a wall and another on the other. So it sort of suggests it's sort of what we would expect to see with like a deposit that's sort of ritually commemorating the foundation of a household structure or something like that. So it seems possible, it may be even likely that this deposit of these highly fragmented sherds, first of all, they probably came from somewhere else first. So they may have been some sort of ritual offering before, and then they were repurposed to maybe like sanctify this plaza space or something along those lines. And then, given the difficulty with GPR in a jungle setting and the limitations with magnetometry, moist ground, and limestone, do you know of newer technology being developed presently? Oh, good question. Not off the top of my head, but I still think that it would be worthwhile trying some of the more common shallow geophysical methods at some of these sites. I think probably gradiometry might have the best chance at getting the best data, but I feel like it's worth trying something like resistivity. GPR I know has been tried before, and I think the results were less clear than some of the magnetometry stuff, but you never know. So I don't know of any new methods, but I do think trying some of the old methods and trying some of them in coordination with each other, like if we could resurvey the same plazas using electrical resistivity or something like that, that could potentially reveal more things that we didn't know. Other questions?